Richard Niles. In 2003, I interviewed Dave Weckl, a drummer whose unique talent and fire had won him the induction into the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame of 2000. His performances with Paul Simon, George Benson, Michel Camilo, Robert Plant, Dave Grusin, Mike Stern, and Anthony Jackson brought him public acclaim. But with his dynamic contribution to the Chick Corea Elektric Band and the Acoustic Band, 1985 to 1991, Weckl became a jazz icon. In this interview, Weckl discusses his development, the influence of Steve Gadd, playing in complex meters, his sonic concepts, the use of computers, and his work with Chick Corea. He also talked about his albums as a leader and composer, revealing a thinking musician who blends razor-sharp precision with passion. Don't miss the chance to chat with one of the greatest drummers of all time, Dave Weckl.
Most of the creation comes from the differences or the specific different qualities of the drum setup in the beginning. So the writing aspect happens from that creative place.
Right. Sure.
And if the instrument isn't here, it's not even possible to recreate. So it makes more sense to me to talk about all those things you want to talk about and then actually let the people hear the actual final product that sounds the way that I want it to sound, and they know what it sounds like then.
So the Midwest, so many really talented, great people have come from the Midwest, and I actually asked Gary Burton about this, and I said, Gary, why? What is it about? And he said, well, the Midwest is so boring.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There ain't shit to do but practice.
Right. So that's what you did your whole childhood.
Exactly. Especially if you're an only child. I know a lot of only child Midwesterners that really did well because there was nothing else to do, basically. If you chose to pursue something, whether it was music or sports, you usually ended up being pretty good at it because you usually ended up finding somebody else that you could do that with that had the same desires and goals and really put some good outfits together. Again, whether it was music or sports, you could really get into a camaraderie with somebody, and you also had the freedom because there wasn't the pressures of a difficult urban area or a society to have to conform to as far as noise and all that kind of stuff. It was wide open households, and luckily for me, I had like I said, I was an only kid. I didn't have any sibling competition either, so it was, my father was a frustrated amateur piano player who wanted me, not pushed me, but saw the interest and wanted me to pursue it if I wanted to. So,
now, did you start from the beginning with teachers, or did you?
No, I actually started with guitar first, and I hated it. I was like 6 or 7. I was a Michael Nesmith nut. I wanted the sideburns and hat and all that stuff. When I was 8, 6. But I mean, my parents didn't know any better, and bad teachers are probably one of the main reasons why people don't pursue it, because they get bad direction early. And I think that was maybe part of the problem with the guitar. The other thing was that it just wasn't a natural thing for me. It just didn't come naturally, whereas the drums did.
Right.
Something where I sat down and started beating on box lids, and that turned into my dad following the desire and buying me a cheap little kit, and I just put on records, copied, played, came really easy.
You figured out how to work it out.
I had a little direction. The kid next door, him and his brothers had a band and rock and roll band, and he just gave me some real basic, set it up this way, you play it this rock beat this way.
Your foot does this, foot does that.
Kind of. It wasn't even that. That was kind of later from listening and really kind of figuring out from the records. But thanks to my father, after I was playing to all the rock and roll records and picking it up pretty easily and playing along, because of my dad's interest in jazz and ragtime and all that type of stuff, and Dixieland and big bands and all that stuff, he turned me on to that aspect and that side of music. So it inspired me, and then he brought home a Buddy Rich record one day, and it was kind of the beginning of the end.
And how soon before you started studying with a teacher in a more serious kind of fashion?
I probably played about 4 years. My dad bought me a new Gretsch kit, and 4 free lessons came with the kit.
Great.
That was my first introduction to it, and it was good, so I continued, and that was kind of the beginning of the whole teacher-student thing.
Now, at some point, you sort of thought, I've got my own approach to this. When you were formulating your concept, what kind of stuff interested you, and what kind of stuff did you want to offer?
It really took me a while to get to that place, because for me, I became aware very early of drummers like Steve Gadd that I sort of was trying to model myself after, as far as being the in-demand studio guy, you know, that back in my early days and moving to the East Coast. But I was in college then, and I was in my early 20s, and I was still... At that point, before I sort of hit the scene, I sort of considered a Gadd clone, which was good and bad. Any kind of a clone is not a good thing, you know. Right. So, through different studying and the realization that I can't do that, you know, I started to bust out of it and experiment with my setup and listen to a lot of other different kinds of music, more ethnic things, and a lot of that was through the necessity of having to learn it by getting in groups like French Toast and Michel Camilo and learning about those rhythms and that kind of thing. So my drum set had to change. Studying with a teacher by the name of Gary Chester who really spread out the kit and put up a couple different hi-hats on each side of the kit and made, you know, even though I was doing that before I studied with him, his a lot of his teaching aspect was, you know, opened up a lot of different things, independence-wise and idea-wise. So I was really in my early 20s when I started to sort of, I would say, develop my own sound and my own thing. And sound was a big part of it for me. It always has been, you know, the presentation of what it sounds like. Not only the drums, but now the entire thing, which is why I mix and produce my own records. So.
Right. Well, I'm going to get to that in a minute, but when you say independence, a lot of people think about revolution and political stuff, but that's not what you're talking about. So
no, of course, right.
Give an example of what, number one, what that means, and number two, what kind of exercises you might do to develop that.
Well, in simple terms, it's just four-way coordination, because playing the drums really can involve using all four of your limbs, both legs, both hands, independently, all at once, and maintaining some sense of rhythm, that consistent rhythm, hopefully, that feels good and provides a consistent pulse through the music. Meanwhile, also offering the different dynamic and sound contrasts that make everybody different, you know, that goes into the music. So, and I mentioned Gary Chester, the teacher that I had studied with in the early 80s, he would incorporate the voice, actually, as a fifth independent. So that, you know, he would set up ostinatos where the bass drum foot, you know, the right foot would play a repetitive rhythm pattern that would be a bass part or something that would be not a simple thing either, you know, a syncopated rhythm, you know, but it would be repetitive, be an ostinato pattern that wouldn't change every measure. So that was a constant, and then there was another part with the right hand that would be considered a ride part, you know, that would either be on the ride cymbal or a cowbell or another closed hi-hat that would also be a consistent, you know, type of part, you know, along with the bass part. And then you would read something with your left hand. You would read, you read a page of simple snare drum rhythms or whatever, you know, that you could play with one hand. Meanwhile, your left foot was keeping quarter notes going. And then you would take the voice and you would read it down, and you would sing the quarter note, then you would sing the right foot, then you would sing the right hand, then you would sing what you're reading, and then you would turn around and do it left-handed. So this obviously was a real conscious practice of dexterity in concentration regarding coordinated independence. And that's what basically allows drummers to do what they do, is having the ability to separate the limbs and have certain parts of your body remain on autopilot, if you will, to keep the consistency of rhythm happening. So it's pretty much a never-ending, you could take it to as many levels as you want to take it to.
Yeah, I've heard it described also as if you multiply the word knack by about 1,000, you know, because you get the knack for doing something that you practice, and then you get the knack for the next level of it, and then the next level of it. And it's a very sophisticated thing. It's a coordination. It's a very physical thing.
Basically, it's practicing something which, as you know, as a musician, as you practice something until it becomes second nature, and it's just repetitive repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. You know, you just keep doing it over and over until it becomes part of your natural ability that you can then build upon and work something else in that becomes natural as well.
Well, let's move on to what you were talking about before about the sound. Now, that's something you've worked on a lot, and tell us how your thinking on the sound of the drums has developed.
I've always listened to drummers that have a very natural sound, and like I said, coming out of the big band era of, you know, Buddy Rich and Maynard Ferguson and Stan Kenton and all the big bands, that the drummers all had very big, wide open tuned drums, and listening to the rock and roll, you know, sounds of John Bonham and all the other recording drummers at that, you know, at that time, different rock bands, and then Steve Gadd came along and sort of changed the whole concept of what recorded drum sound was once the sort of disco era happened with all the dead drum sounds and the very precise, punchy sounds. So when I really, really got into the sound aspect was, I would have to give, you know, Steve Gadd that credit. And everybody has heard Steve Gadd, whether you know it or not, you know, because he's, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, he was on everything from Paul Simon to Carly Simon to Lee Ritenour to Chick Corea. So it was everything that was basically coming out in those days, Gadd was on, and his sound was pretty recognizable, especially his snare drum sound. I was in college at the time, and I was really, you know, my early 20s, and I just turned 20 probably when I really start experimenting. My drums, I realized that the drums had to get smaller in order to produce the sound, because you could tune the drum relatively low and it would still retain a high pitch, basically. Whereas if you tune a bigger drum lower, it's just going to thud, which is okay for the bigger drums, but, you know, the whole idea is to have a, you know, a spectrum of sound, a range of melodic tones, and so my drums kept getting smaller, and my first tom ended up, eventually I went down to an 8-inch tom, and it was an 8 by, I don't know, 6.5, something like that, and with a double ply Mylar plastic thick head on the top and a head on the bottom as well to retain the tone. By itself, it was a pretty soft sound. It didn't have a lot of sound, but you put a microphone on it, and the mic loved it because it was a very contained, full, rich tonality that hit and got out of the way immediately. And so I started to tune my drums that way. It came out of the Gadd thing and then kind of became my own thing because it was a little more open sounding than Gadd's thing was. I didn't use the same heads that he used at the time that I was listening to him heavy. It was, you know, he was into the hydraulic heads filled with oil, right. You know, that were a double ply head filled with oil. And Evans was the company that made that head. And I was always into the Remo thing, which is another head company that makes double ply heads, but they're not filled with any oil. So they're a little thinner and they're more airy and transparent. So from that aspect of the sound of the drums, then I started to take a real interest in how that sound gets reproduced, both live and in the studio, you know, with microphones and mixing consoles and sound reinforcement live and what it's getting reproduced to in the studio. My friend, my partner for a long time in my early records, Jay Oliver, the keyboard player, he and I both had great interest in that, and he quite frankly had more of a handle on it than I did and taught me a lot in our early days of basic recording and sound characteristics of input gain ratios and, you know, that gain structure, that type of thing. And that became what sounds good to my ear, what knob on the mixing console affects the drums in what way, and what do all those little numbers mean of frequencies, you know. And so I just started to study it and gained a pretty good relative frequency pitch of being able to, even now I use it with my band to be able to ascertain problem frequencies in the PA or problem, you know, whatever's going on. I usually get pretty close within a couple of ticks of the problem. Yeah, then it becomes the art of getting the expression of the music to say what you envision it to say. It's one thing to record a bunch of musicians and say, okay, well, here's each musician playing and here's the outcome. It's another to write the music and have a vision of what it's supposed to sound like in your brain and then actually figure out how to do that from a technical sense.
Certainly, the Perpetual Motion record is a great example of that. Drummers' albums are often drummers' albums.
Right.
Which is like probably one of the most boring things in the world to listen to. Whereas that album, I've actually played it a lot on the show in the last series because it's, the tunes are so good and it's musical, and although the drums are featured, the drums are playing the music. The drums are integrated within the structure of the compositions. In other words, you're always playing the compositions, and there's dynamics, which is the wonderful thing, and you have quite a few different sounds that you use on the drums, which is great too, that it's not always the same sound. I would have probably expected your record to be sort of in some way Chick influenced, but actually I hear a lot of like Weather Report echoes and also Yellow Jackets. Was that a conscious thing on your part?
Well, there's so much involved because for me, I'm not a keyboard player.
Yes.
I do play enough keyboards and I've been involved with enough music to know what I like to hear, and given enough time, if I had unbridled time of just sitting at a keyboard, I'll figure out eventually what I want to say and what I want to do. But it works so much better and faster and more enjoyable for me when I can work with somebody like either a Jay Oliver, that we have a certain thing based on our chemistry of writing. And now with Steve Weingart, also the keyboard player in my band, is a whole other chemistry of writing. And quite honestly, it's the place that I'm at in my life right now of what I want to say with my music and the band. Steve and I have a very closely related and same aspect of desire as far as composition is concerned. And we hit it off very well in that arena. So no matter if a given tune starts with his idea or if it starts with my idea, and most everything that I'm involved with from a writing aspect will come from the drum foundation first, of what do I want to portray in the feel of this particular rhythm of this particular song. And a lot of the times the drum set, the composition of the drum set, the use of adding percussion instruments, having two different sounding bass drums, two different sounding snare drums, four toms, and an array of different sounding cymbals that I help design, by the way, which also add to the whole sound characteristic and the sound canvas, as you will, have a lot to do with determining where the grooves come from. For example, the opening tune, Perpetual Motion, Double Up, it's called Double Up because the working title was called Double Bass Drum, because the groove started with both bass drums. I mean, the whole tune is basically both bass drums except for the sax solo and the solo sections, and it's a groove based on that freight train effect that comes with the part that was created with both bass drums. Couldn't do that with a normal kit. Wouldn't work. It's because the tonalities of both bass drums are different. It creates a whole vibe by itself without anybody else playing.
Yeah.
My influences, are, there was always this thing, when I was growing up, like East Coast, West Coast, New York, LA. I gravitated towards New York because I dug everything coming out of New York, whereas LA, it was cool, especially if Gadd was on it, but Gadd was from New York. So I was kind of like, I was into the Brecker Brothers, and I was into the, all the stuff coming out of New York was really where my heart was at. So that's where I went when I was young, and that's what I grew up in my late teens, early 20s, playing with a lot of those great musicians, that once I fell into the studio scene in New York, I was actually working with some of those great musicians that I was listening to when I was a kid. So what I'm trying to get at is that Steve Weingart, for example, and I come out of the same backgrounds because we like Weather Report, we like Chick, we like Herbie, we like, a lot of that type of stuff. It's kind of like the New York Brecker vibe versus the Another Thing, which might be considered either smooth jazz, slick, or too white, for lack of better terminology. You know what I mean? That's where we really hit it off in that aspect, because it's a lot of the melodies that I hear and that I sing are very easy for Steve to grasp. And he'll come up with different harmonies, and I'll hear something and try to pick it out and find it. And a lot of the times I will sit down in a couple-day period and really just get by myself and really come up with drum grooves. I'll throw everything on the computer, and when the time comes that I can get the rhythm section together with Tom, my bass player, we'll get together, and I'll start with those grooves, and we'll just play. And that's the beginning of a lot of the writing, you know.
Sure.
Or I'll give him the grooves and let him start some stuff at home, and then we get together and we formulate it together into a song.
Yeah. Well, the results are great, and Steve's done a tremendous job on the record.
Yeah, he's a great musician.
Yeah.
He just finished his own record too, called Lifetimes,
Good.
which is
Hope
a
you'll get that.
nice record. Yeah, he's really a great musician.
Yeah.
I really, you know, because he comes out of a total classical school and very knowledgeable, and he's growing every day. And it's nice because I feel that we're growing together, you know. So it's a nice relationship.
As you well know, complex time, or what is called complex time signatures, often sound rigid and lack fluidity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what kind of stuff do you do to make it not sound rigid and to make it actually groove like hell? What kind of things do you do to achieve that effect?
Well, concerning odd times, which is anything other than being straight 4/4, something symmetrical that you don't feel like you're falling off of a ledge. I mean, I've always had a problem with odd times for the sake of odd times. It just seems like a mathematical equation to me. But I have to give Steve Gadd credit again because I learned from him through listening to him very early on that the art of making anything groove, there's a way to do it. And it's basically find the backbeat and find the phrase that works. So in 7, you know, it's a very simple formula for me, because 7 is really my favorite odd time signature to play in, because it's not as fast as 5 that you have to get back to the downbeat. And 9 is extended a little too much as well, that you got to think a little bit more with that one. 7 is, at least for me, has always been an easy one to grasp and to find the phrase. And it's really a simple one for me, that because obviously the old joke is, yeah, well, I can play in odd times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So, you know, but obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, right? It's, you know, you feel like you're falling off that ledge, but by simply turning it into a half phrase and finding the backbeat, you know, so it's 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and 1, boom, 2, 5, 6, 7, 1. Then it all of a sudden it becomes, oh, well, there's the backbeat. 1, 2, 3, and it just flows. You
Exactly,
know?
but with the way that you play it also, you don't always subdivide it the same way all the time. And that makes it fluid, and it's a great thing the way you do it, because the backbeat's still felt, but sometimes, you know, instead of making it 4 and 3, you'll make it 3 and 4 briefly. You know,
Well, actually not. See, that's the thing. I never think in dividing up the bar that way, because that turns it into math to me. That turns it into a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. I never do that, and that's the philosophy that I've never agreed with, by simply dividing it up into a certain array of numbers, like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. It becomes a really weird sounding polka to me.
And that's what I'm saying, is that you don't do that. But what if one had to analyze what you actually do,
Right.
you by having the backbeat where it is, the first part of it is like a 4, and the second half of it is a 3, and that's, I mean, you can't get around that. That's the way it is, and that's what makes it groove. But the thing is, some drummers, when they play even the same exact phrase or notes that you play, because they accent it so rigidly, it sounds mechanical.
Right.
But I never find that with your playing. Even though, you know, you're noted for your precision of playing, I've always felt that it's never, you know, it never sounds like a machine. It always sounds like a human being, because you have these dynamics within the phrase that
Well, I always, you know, for me, every groove that I've ever played has really come from singing it first. It's got to be something that makes sense to me, that I can sing and move to without ever picking up a drumstick, you know. So it always starts there for me. And 7 is a perfect example. And to me, the thing that creates groove and creates feel is really 3 basic things. And one of them is consistent feel, consistent placement and space between the notes. It's hard to achieve. That takes a lifetime of practicing to make that a natural ability, and involving different movements of the body that create the space necessary to make that next note fall in the place that feels good. That's one thing. Dynamic contrast is another, the difference between loud and soft. But I think that's where a lot of people stop. And a lot of it has to do with a technical thing, and that is some of the difference between playing match grip and traditional grip. And for listeners that don't know what that means, it basically means the difference between holding the right hand and the left hand the same, which I call and it's not wrong. It's really the most natural approach to playing drums, but it's kind of the caveman approach because both limbs are doing the same thing, and it's up down up down up down with both hands basically. And although it can flow, it's not the give and take caressing type of situation that traditional grip, which comes out of the marching era of holding the left hand when the snare drums were hung around the neck and angled at a point where holding the left hand the same way as the right would not be possible. So they had to devise another way of playing. And all the old jazz drummers, if you've ever seen it, anybody from Buddy Rich to Art Blakey to Max Roach, they all hold the drumsticks for the most part in a traditional setting with the left hand. And that's how I play 95% of the time. Mostly because of the sound contrast, because it's very easy and very natural to get up on the tip of the stick, which creates a different sound. So it's because a lot of the times the problem with match grip is that the dynamic will change, but the sound will remain the same. So therefore it sounds like a machine, because machines, especially in the old days, the drum machines, you could make it softer or louder, but the sound didn't change. And it's very difficult to change the sound with match grip unless you move your body in a kind of unnatural way to get off or up on the tip of the stick. And with traditional, it becomes a natural thing. As you move your hand in and the stick comes up, it automatically goes on the tip of the stick, so it creates this softer, lighter, thinner sound leading up to a heavier backbeat, which creates this constant hills and valley type of approach that flows, to me, much more naturally than the other way of playing match grip.
My friend Danny Gottlieb was telling me that he had a drum pad set up with 10 different drum sounds, depending on dynamics. And he said that because of having studied with Morello, his dynamic abilities were such that he could accurately get whichever sound he wanted. It was one of the few occasions where he could say that computerized music had really actually helped him assess his own abilities. Did you ever do anything like that?
No, that's a little bit much for me. I like to keep it a little bit looser than that. But it's all in the same essence of control. Yeah. And I've always, on my own or through different other teachers or studying and trying to figure out things that Buddy Rich has done and all that kind of stuff. You need to develop your control to be able to do that. So, all that's good and fine, but like I said, it's a little too technical for me. And although I, like you said, maybe I'm known, in some circles for being the technical guy or the precise guy or whatever, for me it's always been about the feel of the music and how that's conveyed. I just happen to be a very anal guy, and I like it to be, I always liked it to be as clean and poppin' as possible, So that's what I went for, especially growing up in the day of machines, It's like you're trying to emulate sometimes and replace a sequencer. Mm-hmm. So you have to be on, in order to work. And I don't think a lot of people kind of get that sometimes, that sometimes you have to be able to do that,
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and quite a few musicians have said this nonsense about, machines have ruined the feel of a lot of music. But I think they've done a lot of good in terms of developing musicians' techniques to say, hey, you bastard, I can do this and better.
Right.
And I'm a human being, and it's made them get their technique up to where, you don't need the machine, and not only that, you can have the part played perfectly accurately and with feel.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I think it's come full circle though too, in a sense of that, it's like, okay, all right, we've brought in the machines now, and we've got a lot of drummers to concentrate to get their technique and get good enough and concentrate on their sound enough and their control to get in the same realm of a machine. And okay, so now we've done that, and now the funny thing is then we tried to get the machines to a point so that they sounded real. Now it becomes the point of, okay, wait, stop. Why are we doing that? If now, a lot of the reason people use machines was real simple. It had everything to do with sound. not about the feel so much, because there's no way that the feel of a Bernard Purdy or a Jeff Porcaro or a Vinnie Colaiuta or the guys that are known for that ability to be able to do the pop stuff really well is ever going to be replaced by a machine. But to me, only from sitting on the other side of the console, it's a sound issue most of the time. You take the guys that, the Steely Dan records. I mean, they're nuts about the sound. As far as I know, they replace most of the sounds with triggered sounds. And it's because they want that clean, precise sound that is pretty much impossible to get with a drum set. I mean, you can't really do it without some sacrifice somewhere. There's always going to be some phasing issue. There's always going to be something that's ringing that you don't want ringing. There's going to be something going on with 13 open microphones that you can't replace with the sample of one instrument. It's more of a sound issue than anything else. So for me, a lot of it is bad engineers have a lot to do with it to me. And there's plenty of them out there. There's a lot of good ones too, but far and few between. And it's the biggest reason for me. It's not that I consider myself the greatest engineer by no means. I really don't know what the hell I'm doing, but I know what I want to hear from the drum and a drum set. And I know, in different aspects now, I've learned, what makes the placement of things work in a mix with reverbs and sounds and just getting it to sound how I want it to sound. That's my most important thing. But I really think as far as the machine thing goes, it's coming full circle now to where, okay, you're getting the guys that can play, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we dig the air again. We dig the human quality of it having the feel of a human that's not totally perfect, that it slows down a little bit here, or it speeds up a little bit there, or it's, but the important thing that you can't get it out of a machine. You can't get the air. It's not there. Just you can't do it.
It's a lot more difficult to get the dynamics.
Yeah. You have to go through painstaking samples. I mean, I've owned so many samplers, and I can, play you stuff that I've sat there and programmed, and people think it's me, and I say, yeah, well, it took me, a day to do this when I could have played it in 5 minutes.
Exactly. Let me ask you about one more thing. Your ex-employer, Mr. Corea, when I interviewed him when he had the Origin thing going, and he was talking about the fact that he, at that time, was trying to play very, very much completely 100% acoustically. And for that reason, he put the drummer on the other side of the stage. He didn't want to hear any piano through the monitors. He wanted to hear it from the piano. So next in line would be the bass player, and then, whatever, and then the drums on the other side. He said because of that, then he could hear the drums acoustically, he could hear himself acoustically, and there was no need for electronics to enter into the equation. Now, one thing that occurred to me that I talked to him about was the fact that modern drums, the actual construction, this is something you've really been involved in heavily, I know, in the design of drums. Modern drums, they're much, much louder. So as a result, got to deal with the drums first. Now, first of all, what you were talking about earlier, the drums that you were using are quieter, because you said they're not putting out as much volume.
Well,
are you conscious of all this, and do you ever play vintage kits, for instance, in a certain situation?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, and just to correct you on a few things.
Oh, please do.
First of all, we're putting back the Electric Band together this summer, so he's still going to be my employer.
Okay, well, yeah, okay, fine.
In some aspects. But so we are looking forward to that. There will be an Electric Band reunion tour in Europe for most of the major festivals, and a new record in the fall. Second of all, having to do with Chick's approach on the acoustic aspect of things. I think all of us, as artists and musicians, we're always trying to find we have an idea and a concept, and that's the way we want to try to make it work at that particular time, and it's all trial and error, and whether it's realistic or not is another aspect. And everybody's different, so it depends. I really think it's depending on the individuals in the concept that you're trying to develop, what, as you say, makes them comfortable to be able to play. Now, coming around to the drum construction aspect, no, I don't know exactly when drum construction changed. I know that a lot of it had to do, yeah, with the drum shells becoming thinner and also the drum heads becoming thinner. Back in the 30s and 40s, it was, you know, very thick shells and calf heads for the most part, and that really doesn't produce a whole lot of sound. It's very soft, but you know, even Buddy Rich, to exemplify your example, you know, eventually got into playing, you know, 5-ply Slingerland drums that were louder than hell, you know, in just about every situation. Tony Williams is another example. It didn't matter if he was playing, you know, trio or whatever it was. I mean, it was rock and roll jazz, you know, with really loud Gretsch drums with the big black dot controlled sound drum heads, you know. So, like I said, I think it's up to the individual. When you're leading your own ship, you've got your idea of how you want it to work, and it's really up to, you know, everybody else to try to conform to that, because that's the whole concept of leading your own band, is to present it and do it your way. So it's one of the biggest reasons I'm doing it. It's not to get rich, let me tell you.
Sure.
You know, it's because it's basically, you get to a point where you want to try to present it your way. You know, you've got the idea of how you'd like to do that. So I completely understand Chick's philosophy, and he and I have had many discussions about it, because when he has tried to make that work when we play together, basically the whole concept of no monitors is impossible for me. It's not possible. The drum sets that I use, I've been an endorser of Yamaha drums for 18 or 19 years now. They don't make a drum that's a vintage drum or that is soft. It doesn't exist. When I play acoustic trio, I play very small drums.
Okay.
I'll use a 16-inch bass drum. I use what they call, it's a little hip gig kit is what it's called, and it's
I know
it is actually quieter. And I actually used it on this new Rendezvous record that's coming out, that we recorded live in New York at the Blue Note last year. But when you're dealing with acoustic piano and you're trying to play progressive, aggressive bebop or jazz, or especially when it can get into Latin, and you're not playing in, let's say, a traditional sense of how they played in the 40s, or you know, that style, when it's a little bit more aggressive and bombastic, let's put it that way, can be, where the dynamic range will get to that point. It almost doesn't work with an acoustic piano. It's really difficult for me to feel like I'm in the same dynamic ballpark of acceptability with an acoustic piano.
At the same time, you do say, I mean, you just said that you like, for instance, for a certain gig, you might choose to use.
Oh yeah, when I do acoustic piano gigs, I use different drums, I use different cymbals than I'm using at Ronnie's with my group right now. For sure. Yeah, have to. It doesn't, because it doesn't work. However, like I said, the whole concept of Chick wanting to hear the piano and hearing everything else on the stage is a cool concept for him, but when you're talking about the drummer trying to adapt to the same concept and hear the acoustic piano by itself,
so
is not impossible.
Yeah, and I'm sure the drummer in that band had monitors.
For a time, I heard he didn't.
Oh, he didn't?
And he didn't, you know, because Chick was really trying to do the acoustic thing and not have any monitors anywhere. Which, you know, for me, I just can't make that work, because I need to hear what he's doing, and I want to hear what he's doing, and I don't want to guess. Otherwise, I'd have to play brushes all night.
Do you use any of your monitors?
I do in my situation, with my band, in louder situations where the style of music that we're playing, you know, can go from rock to jazz to sambas to, you know, Latin to anything within one song. So there's a real broad dynamic range. Yeah, I use in-ear monitors for two reasons. One is, I've got everybody in the band going through my mixer that I use, that all the drum mics are going through there as well. So basically the sound in my ears is, I'm my own monitor man, so I don't have to worry about monitors on stage, and so the sound doesn't get out of hand with that. If I need more saxophone, I turn them up myself on the fader, you know.
And also, it's
well, that's the other
device.
reason. It's ear protection as well, because you're stuffing these foam things in your ears that are earplugs basically. Mm-hmm. So the actual sound of sitting over the drums is cut in half pretty much of the acoustic sound. So it's saving my ears at the same time that the sound that I'm hearing is very pleasing.
Good idea.
The biggest aspect is that I hear everybody in time as to what they're doing, and that became an issue with Chick and I, to go back to that for a second, because the distance aspect of him hearing me from across the stage, it was enough to affect the time. It was
okay.
It was enough to where I was hearing him
late.
Well, no, I was hearing him where he was putting it, but if I'd play with that, he was hearing me behind.
Okay.
So it became a kind of a funny game we got into for a while, trying to figure that one out. But there was enough, delay, because we had enough space in the stage, and it just, it was.
But obviously, with the electric band, you're not going to have that problem, because.
No, I'll use the same system that I use now with my rig.
I mean, he's got to use monitors because he's playing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if he does for the drums. I still think we try to keep the stage in that essence of the drums being not monitored. Because I think the PA handles it. Sometimes he'll get it.
He's got to use monitors for himself.
Yeah, definitely.
To hear his own stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, and how big a band is that going to be? Is it going to be the normal electric band?
Yeah, it'll be in most aspects. The tour, the musicianship will change a little bit. Patitucci can't do the tour. He's going to do the record. Marienthal can make half the tour, so a guy by the name of Mike Pope is going to play bass for the summer, and Eric and Steve Davis are going to swap sax chairs. So like I said, we're going to be doing a new recording in the fall, which will be the original members totally.
Great.
And on the summer, Gambale will be doing it, and I'll be doing it. And, we had a little pre-run last October that was a blast. It was just like everybody was 10 years more progressed and mature and advanced, and we came back and played the old music, and it was like a whole other ball game. It was really a lot of fun. So, not that it wasn't fun to begin with, but it was really cool to kind of take the time off from that and come back where everybody's gone through all these other musical experiences in life and all that stuff, and it was nice. It was a lot of fun.
Well, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, and we've got more than enough, and
cool.
That's great. You've already done your DJing thing.
There you go.
And good morning.
Cool.
Good evening,
all
good
right.
afternoon.
Cool.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Richard. All right.